We're here at St Mary le Bow, Cheapside. Traditionally, Cockney was somebody born within the sound of Bow Bells. That's one definition, it goes back quite a long way. But some of our modern notions about what the Cockney might be are not held in the early 19th century and in the medieval and Shakespearean period. We tend to think of the Cockney nowadays as being kind of badge of distinction, something that people are proud of, but also of it being kind of specifically kind of working class, costermongers, barrow boys from the East End. What's interesting about the term, I suppose, is the way in which for most of its history, up until the mid-Victorian period, didn't really have that flavour. It was much more a term of abuse for people who were thought not to be gentlemen, who were thought to be sort of misshapen children of the city. A Cockney, literally, etymologically if you like, is a cock's egg. So in other words, an impossibility, a pampered and effeminate child of the city. And for a long time that was the flavour of the term. So in calling somebody Cockney, you were identifying them not so much as working class, but as somebody who didn't really fit anywhere, and who, especially if you took them out of the city, was simply a joke. What I became interested in is the way in which this term was being used, not only to describe Londoners in the early 19th century, but actually the new suburbanites, as it were, of the early industrial metropolis. The term had a special sort of intensity, a special sort of venom, if you like, in the 1810s, because London was expanding so quickly. And lots of those people who formerly used to live in London started living in the suburbs, Camden Town, Dulwich, even Hampstead. And the term Cockney was often being used by conservatives to describe a whole new belt, as it were, of the social order. Not the working class specifically, but the lower middle class, the kind of class from which Dickens emerged, Leigh Hunt and Keats and so on. So what I became interested in is the way in which this term is being used, rather as we might use Essex man and Essex woman today, as a way of indicating a new kind of species of being, a species of being that you can't quite put in any particular category, that seem neither to belong in the middle class or in the plebeian class, and that people don't quite understand, that they're afraid of in a way, that they're the new citizens on the block. I suppose the main figures of the study, the kind of people I'm interested in, are the poets, Leigh Hunt, John Keats most notably, because they're the people who really attract quite a lot of Cockney criticism for the way in which they write about nature. They write about nature, according to the conservatives, like people who only know it from books, or only know it from their private garden in suburbs such as Hampstead or Camden Town. So they're not writing about the grand rolling mountains and lakes that Wordsworth liked to write about, or Walter Scott. They're writing about these little feminised bowers, domestic bowers in which certain kinds of romantic or sexual frisson might take place. Fanciful places, places in which you might feather and animate your own little private mythology, your own private world. So quite often when critics are accusing these guys of being Cockney, they're accusing them of being effeminate, strange, fanciful, out of touch. They're attacking a kind of poetry which seems made up and meant for the domestic garden. I suppose for me, it became interesting as a way of thinking about not only the growth of suburbanism in the early 19th century, but also, in a way, the conditions in which most of us now live. Because it's a little sign, as it were, that the Cockney and the Cockneyess, if you like, are little ancestors of modernity. They're what most of us have now become.